Welcome to this live talk on non-duality. I'm Russ Rapp, and if you are watching this after the live talk has ended, I enjoy your comments, so comment on the video, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And I guess to start off, what I want to do is, for those of you who don't really know what non-duality is, I think I want to cover that first off, just to kind of set the groundwork for what we're going to talk about. Non-duality, if you separate the two parts to the word non-dual, which means obviously not two. So non-duality means not two, but what does that really mean for you in regards to your life or your situation? Because if I say not two, okay, well, what does that mean? And essentially what that means is that there is no separation, or the separation is an illusion. And oftentimes when you hear non-dual speakers talk about non-duality, they refer to phrases like there is no person, or the world is not real, things like that. And I think that's coming from the standpoint of being a separate self making a statement. And let me back up here. Essentially, non-duality is recognizing the illusion or the facade of your suffering. And that doesn't mean that how you would define suffering or pain ends, but your identification with that is called into question. And so for someone that isn't familiar with non-duality, why are you interested? Why would you want to learn about non-duality, or what is there to gain from non-duality? And essentially there's nothing to gain. It's just a recognition of life as it is, and a recognition of the lies that you tell yourself about your reality. And so oftentimes the overarching idea of non-duality is kind of forgotten about, in the sense that we take the concept of non-duality and want to make something or do something with it. And so when talking about non-duality, it's, well, how do I become an unperson? How do I recognize that the world is an illusion, or my perceptions are lying to me, or, what do I do? How do I become awakened forever and always? Because, I have these peak moments where I recognize, I kind of peek behind the veil and I recognize what non-duality is teaching. But then I go back to my daily life and I deal with all the stress and all the commitments and everything that I have to do and be responsible for. And so what I want to do as a separate self, or my ego, however you want to define it, is I want to take this idea of non-duality and make it everything and always. And so what ends up happening, if you're watching this video and you're wondering, what are Russ Rapp's credentials for talking about non-duality? I guess what I would say to that is, one of the things the process that I have done in my life is recognizing how the mind works and where the illusion, where the magic trick comes into play. And I think that's where speakers of non-duality are connect with people that they communicate with, in the sense that they point out what's not it, what is not real, in a compelling way that people can relate to. Because being able to understand non-duality is something that you want to be able to grasp and hold on to. And so by pointing out to what non-duality isn't, and being able to communicate that is the way to, I guess, teach non-duality. But the key is, going into this video, I had all these ideas of ways to communicate, but the difficult thing with non-duality is to be able to communicate it effectively and to be able to take an idea that is undefinable or not tangible and make it something that you can understand is the difficulty in this transmission. And what you have to realize is the key that I want to portray to you is, if you're looking for a specific message or a specific messenger when it comes to this topic, ask yourself why. Ask yourself, if I look at this character, this person talking on YouTube, then I'm watching this video, and I say, what are the thoughts going through my head? Well, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, or he rambles, or it's not really making sense. So what do I want to do? I want to find someone that really, truly understands the essence of non-duality, truly gets it, and is someone who is like an awakened master that in every moment of every day is reflecting this sense of aliveness, because there is no person. There's this emptiness here. There's nothing happening. There is no person. I want to find that person, because then I can learn from them to be the same kind of non-person that they are. And for those that are knowledgeable or have looked into non-duality, that is kind of the other end of the spectrum, because if I can fix this chair here. There we go. So as you can tell, life happens as it does, and that's how it goes. And so when you're into non-duality and you're familiar with this lingo and the way people talk about it, you have to realize that there's nothing that they're giving you. And so this idea that you're going to somehow find the guru that's going to teach you how to be a non-person, you are already non-dual. You are already the essence of non-duality. It's just that you don't believe it, essentially. And that's the behavior of the separate self, is thinking that you can find absolution, find the answer to the mystery while maintaining being the separate self. And the whole idea of becoming a person, becoming enlightened or awakened, is this idea of separation. So, welcome. It's good to see you online here. This is my third time reloading the page. Sorry about that. The live feed keeps getting stuck buffering. So I'm hoping you're catching this. So as you come online, ask any questions you may have, comments. Like I said, I had a lot of things kind of mentally prepared to go over, but as I wing this, nothing exactly comes out as I hope, and that's how life works. But the beauty about non-duality is no matter what I say, it doesn't really matter. But I think, the reason why, and to be completely honest, this is the first live talk I've done in a while, and it's always here in this moment, but I haven't really wanted to do it. And there was a point a couple of months ago where I felt like just basically deleting my entire YouTube channel, all the videos that I've made, just getting rid of them completely. I'm sure on the internet, they're always there somewhere. But for me, I just wanted to just burn it all to the ground and just delete everything. And, I mentioned it to my wife and my son, and they're like, oh, really? You're going to do that? And so I kind of just waited on it. And not sure really the direction I wanted to go, because, when I made the other video kind of preparing for these series of some videos I'm going to do for live talks, it was more of like a polished type of a thing where I really focus on what I was saying, and it was only 30 seconds long. But even just making that video in the sense that I wanted to create it was frustrating to me. And it kind of brought back that sense of, why am I doing this? What do I get out of it? What am I helping other people? But I think I'm doing it because here I am, and I don't exactly know why. I have some thoughts behind that as far as, being a source of kind of feedback, being a mirror for some people, because I think at this moment in time, a lot of the things that we go through, or that I've gone through internally, the process, because a lot of times, when it comes to non-duality, there is nothing you have to do. The recognition of the truth of it is here. It's this. There is nothing. And at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about, or here in a little bit at least, I'm going to talk about, how to be in the moment. That's kind of the key. So if you've made it here this far, 10 minutes in, and you're not totally confused, then stick with me, because I'm going to get into that as far as like, how do you live in the moment? How do you be in the moment? What does that mean? But when it comes to non-duality, this is it. This is it. But, in the sense of living in time, we go through process. And I think kind of the beauty of non-duality is the openness of releasing, of letting go, the cliche of peeling back the layers of the onion and finding, what's at the center of the onion, the essence, because to me, it's part of the process of being courageous and open to life, to love, is being able to come up against your shadow. Like shadow work, I think is part of the process of finding those pain points, finding that suffering and that stuff that has been kind of embodied in your life, and releasing that. And instead of staying superficially at the surface of what you're dealing with, what you're going through, is finding out, sitting with, understanding what is underneath that. What is the trigger? What is the pain that's underneath the story on top that you're telling yourself is why you're acting this way, why you're feeling this way, and how do you deal with that? And that has nothing to do with non-duality. That's the beauty part. Non-duality is more like the idea of God's grace or forgiveness, or believing in Jesus Christ. And the struggle that some people have with non-duality is there's this idea that there is no story. Everything you tell yourself about your past, your present, or even what's going on right now is just a story. And so it becomes super dry. And so if you watch other speakers that say, well, there is no one speaking, there is no person, there is no one this, there's no that, then it becomes so dry that it can actually work as a flip to have people be like, oh, I get it now. Or it can just frustrate the heck out of people when you say, there is no person, there is nothing happening. I didn't show up. I'm not here sitting in a chair in a room talking to a computer screen about non-duality. That's not happening. So what does that even mean? I don't get it. So it's so dry. And so a lot of times, if you look at human nature, throughout history, we believe in mythology. And so having the story behind that, having the understanding of that, is something that enriches and deepens the connection to the message. And so if you get into that, if you get into sort of any sort of religious talk when it comes to non-duality, that can be sacrilegious. to the canon of non-duality, because there is no story. So how can you talk about this? And there is no past, there's no present. But that's not how we communicate as human beings, and that's not our understanding. And so oftentimes you can probably connect better through understanding that how did God show his love? How did God show forgiveness of sins? Well, I don't have sins. Sins are just some religious dogma. I don't believe in that. Okay, great. You don't believe in that, but you do believe in some things. And what are those things that you were believing in that may or may not be true? And so you send your son to the earth, Jesus Christ, to be the embodiment of the promise of the grace of forgiveness of sins, essentially, because that's essentially what, if you read A Course in Miracles, it kind of really highlights some of that a little bit easier. But even in the Bible, there's a lot of verses that kind of hint towards non-duality type teachings and stuff like that from Jesus. And so that's where, having that depth, that history, that enrichedness can be something that is beneficial, that people can connect with. Regardless of, kind of where you're coming from. That's how we communicate throughout history. And it's kind of saying the same story over and over again in a lot of ways, especially if you compare different religions and stuff. But so Ista, welcome again. So it looks like it may be working. I like the fact that you are spontaneous. The plan of no plan is the best path. Well, see, for me, I do have a plan, especially in the few days leading up to knowing I'm going to be talking about non-duality. I'm more conscious or aware of kind of what kind of things I want to bring into the conversation. But, unless you write it down or prepare or, come up with a list of ideas that you want to make sure you cover, you get into talking and it just goes wherever it goes. And that's how life is. But there's also that other kind of tendency of creating structure. And so I enjoyed this way better than, at least at this point. But I think sometimes the what you can learn from doing things that are maybe difficult, or if there's certain things in your life that continues to show up, essentially. We watched Bruce Almighty with Jim Carrey, the overactor. But Bruce Almighty is when he meets God, and God basically says, "Hey, Bruce, you're going to be God for a while," and he decides to improve his life, and it's kind of a magical way of thinking about God. But then towards the end, he realized there's all these other people that are praying, and he's like, "Oh, I gotta." With all this power, I got to have this responsibility to help these people that are praying. And throughout the movie, there's a character that holds up, like a homeless person holds up a cardboard sign, and there's different messages. But God keeps speaking through Bruce in ways that he's kind of going through the same type of issues Bruce is, and God's trying to point him in a certain direction, but he keeps ignoring, keeps kind of shutting God out, essentially, if you will. And so that's kind of where the truth of non-duality, truth of God, is speaking to you through those things that are continuing to happen, whether it's a habit or pain or relationships that you're going through. And so when you have those issues, you really got to kind of recognize that and try to dig in and find what is underneath that, because oftentimes it's some pain. You talk about healing your inner child and stuff. I mean, there's something to that, and there's something to knowing who you are and kind of your nature versus nurture. So nature is how is your life, how has the objective world been affecting you, your relationships, that sort of thing. But then there's this that's nurture. Let me back up. Nurture is how the outside world is kind of affecting your life. Nature, the natural, is kind of how you are in the world. And so knowing that, understanding yourself, know thyself, then you can start to recognize what those messages are trying to tell you. And if you listen, you can find out what are those stories that you're subconsciously, because essentially, in a way, how that works is the pain goes into your subconscious. And I'm not an expert or a psychologist or whatever, but I've studied some psychology and different things. So I have a layperson's understanding of it. But you kind of bring that in, and really that's kind of hopefully what I bring to the table is recognizing how I tick, how I operate, how my mind works, how the separate self continues to pour out its stories, and understanding that. And so knowing that, you can kind of look deeper into what are those things, those stories that are in your subconscious, or even, a lot of times embodied in your body through the emotions, that, because essentially emotion, what those emotions are is kind of the communication between your mind and your body, in a sense, where a lot of things get stuck in your emotions and sometimes solidify into your body, into your muscles, into your structure. And so recognizing how those things interact, then if you can recognize the subconscious stories that you tell yourself, then you can kind of find relief from that. Because ultimately, you're not here to learn about non-duality, because you already know what non-duality, because you are non-duality, essentially. But you're trying to escape or find relief from suffering. That's essentially, most likely, I would assume, why you're here. But let's also find out what Ista, am I saying that right? Ista? I don't know. Is that, let's see, like Swedish or Norwegian, some sort of that area, or I don't know. But Ista says, I would like to go back in a time machine and start a conversation about non-duality with Jesus. I wonder how he would respond. Yes, I wonder the same thing. In the Bible, Jesus speaks in a lot of parables and kind of allegories or analogies. And so that's, it's another way of, if you look at the style of Jesus's teaching, if he were just say, oh, you are no person, none of this exists, none of this is real, there's only God's love and forgiveness, infinite love is the only truth, everything else is illusion. If he spoke in those terms, it's very abstract and very hard to grasp on a human level, things that we deal with on a daily basis. And so Jesus often talked in parables of the mustard seed and different things like that, where people can, or a lot of agriculture, because that was kind of the culture at the time, in regards to that, or human relationship stories that people can be like, oh, I get that. And then the wisdom behind that is kind of interwoven in between. So that's where Jesus was a very effective speaker and teacher, because that was his style. So I think, maybe Jesus would just say non-duality is not two. Or I don't know, but I think it would be probably a lot of stories as well. Speaking of Jim Carrey, I do believe we are living inside a Truman Show simulation. Yeah, and I think I've talked about that in other videos a little bit. Okay, hold on. Ista is pronounced Ishta. Okay. Kind of what I was thinking, but I'm learning Spanish, but I'm not too up on other languages. Ishta, Oshka, Mashi. Okay, so you add, I think that I'm saying it right. You add kind of an H sound. Translates eyes of heaven in, oh boy, Ogapa Degia Lakota. Oh, like Native American. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, I was way off then. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, Native American tribe. Yeah, I'm familiar with Lakota. I just don't know the language. So, yeah, I'm assuming that is maybe, is that your actual name, or is that just kind of your, username, if you will? Okay, so I'll be back in 1 second. I did warm up some water to No, it's just my YouTube handle. Okay, that's what I thought. I'm going to grab some hot tea, and I will be back. So in the time that I'm gone, just take a moment to just be aware of your surroundings and just relax. I'll be back in a minute. All right, I'm back. That's the beauty of non-duality, is there was no person here. And there is no person. So Ishta says, there is the statement from Christ, if thy eye be single, your whole body will be filled with light. I often wonder if this be a reference to non-duality. If you know what verse that is, I'd be curious. I don't remember that offhand, but just let me know. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is we took a trip to Florida here a while back, and one of the days we wanted to go take a trip, so I hopped in Uber with my wife, and I got a vibe from the Uber driver that he would be into this sort of thing. So it just kind of spontaneously happened. His name was Joseph, so I want to give a shout out to Joseph from Florida who does Uber driving. Because I did tell him at the end that I make these videos and told him to check it out. So if you're out there, Joseph, just want to say peace. But we were talking about a lot of things, kind of spiritual and that sort of thing. And he made the comment, something about, how, babies or young children or toddlers are more connected with the source, or more, I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but essentially like how babies are at one with the world. And I think that goes along with the idea of the fall from grace, the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve ate the apple of knowledge and became essentially separate from each other and separate from God. I think that is the essence of that is a non-duality story. And I think part of that is this idea of becoming aware abstractly or in a rational sense. So when we separate ourselves from the animal kingdom in development, we have kind of the God consciousness, or made in the image of God, in the sense that even though we're all consciousness, however you want to define that, but we have an awareness of our reality, an awareness abstractly or intellectually of who we are. And so kind of the fall from grace would be trying to be God. Let's see. Maybe I'll word it differently. Trying to become God or act like God, or as a separate self, instead of recognizing the inherent nature of being one of God's children, if you want to say it like that. And again, these are words that we use to try to communicate an indefinable way of things. So a lot of it has to do with our mind. And so if you watch a lot of other non-dual speakers, kind of the idea of it is, how do I quiet my mind? How do I get rid of my mind? The mind is a problem. My thoughts never stop. I'm always judging. I'm always thinking this, and I just want to be at peace. I don't want to have to think anymore. And thoughts become this negative thing that you want to get rid of, or just stop altogether. And so the enlightened guru masters say that they never think. But they do think, but it's in the moment. There is no person, but there is a person, but it's not me. I don't identify it as that person, and things just happen. So why are you such a jackass? Pardon my French. Oh, it's because there's this thing that's happening and I'm not that. Okay, well. So, how often is non-duality used as a belief system to rationalize your behavior or how you think? And so to get back to Joseph's comment, if you look at development, babies are at one with their environment in a connected way, but they're not like the essential of becoming, developing into, human consciousness, or developing into kind of rational thinking that essentially differentiates yourself from your environment. So people that want to come back to the source, find God, they see the mind, rationality, intelligence as the enemy. So I just want to basically be lobotomized into being, someone that just has a, 1,000-foot stare. It just kind of droops my mouth open and talks quietly and calmly. And I think there is some positives to that, because it can be relaxing to listen to speakers who have this kind of monotonous, like quiet, mesmerizing type approach. And so if you want to find peace, go out in the forest and listen to the birds chirp and the wind through the trees. So babies essentially are connected to the environment, but I'm no longer a baby, so I can only just assume from being one in the past, even though that never happened, apparently. When babies are so connected to the environment, if you look at psychology studies of how when young children look at themselves in the mirror, they see another person, and some of that aspect of being able to identify who you are. And so what I'm getting at is babies don't really see themselves as godlike. They see the environment as themselves. So they're not really concerned. You could be like, bleeding to death on the floor, and if the baby's hungry, the baby's still going to be crying for food or milk. And so it's not the fact that they're like babies are some enlightened entities, essentially, because if you look at the goal of that people have when it comes to these types of topics, it's like, well, I want to be at peace. I want to be at one with the universe. I want to be in touch with God. And then it's like, oh, look at these babies. They just live in the moment. Whatever happens, happens. Like, well, yes, that's true. But look at their existence. They, there's, a few main functions that they do. They sleep, they play, they eat, and they go to the bathroom. And there's not much outside of that. And when they don't have food, or if they're tired, they don't seem like they're having a really great time. And so that's why when you put like entities that don't have rational thinking on a pedestal and say, well, they're connected, they are just at one with everything. Well, yes, we all are at one with everything, but their experience isn't pleasant, isn't painless in the sense that what we're trying to accomplish with non-duality. And so that's not the goal of non-duality, is to become pain-free, if you will. It's just to recognize the illusion of your suffering. Okay, Ishta says, Matthew 6:22 is that verse, so thank you for that. And Merck Goff, the quote sounds like seeing without separation, feeling your true body as awareness, or something in so-called modern non-dual language. Not that there is such a thing, since duality is in language. Yes. Merck says, can we just train ourselves to stop caring about the mind, at least personal thoughts, and better discern between working mind and thinking mind, if that concept is helpful? But the me is not there without thought to even be peaceful. It's either personal identity or oneness. The oneness and you are not compatible. Okay, I'm glad you made those comments, Merck Goff. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Can we train ourselves to stop caring about the mind? I think the answer to that is yes. I think there's techniques that you can do, meditation. One of the things I've been doing, I kind of set goals on a monthly basis of daily habits that I can do. Because a lot of times we want an easy fix to make changes in our life. A lot of times those changes have to take a certain amount of weeks to get the habit built in. And if you notice habits that you do, the ones that you typically don't like, or that you see as negative or automatic or subconscious, where you do them because you feel like you have to do them or you should do them. And so trying to develop a habit that you define as being something that you want to do, or a goal, or something positive in your life, it's something that you can define as something you should do because it's healthy. But in the process of doing it, it's something you don't want to do, or the habit isn't built in. And so when you try to, let's say I want to work out every day. And so if you're not in the habit of doing it, to develop the muscle, develop the habit of working out takes effort, essentially. And so it's more of a proactive sense of a habit. So then I guess your ego kind of feels like in control in those moments. Whereas in a habit that you don't want to do, you worry about this, or you think about that, or whatever it is, those feel like something that you don't have control. So in a lot of ways, a lot of this comes down to this idea of feeling that you're in control, and how do you let go of that control? How do you stop caring about the mind? Like I said, there's different techniques that you can do. Non-duality, just to be clear, has nothing to do with that. But for me, one of the things that I've been doing this month it's called tapping, or I think the program that I learned from is emotional freedom techniques. And so it's kind of like acupressure, sort of a technique where, like acupuncture, you stick needles in, but acupressure is pressure points in your body. And so there's this whole program. I'm not going to get into it all right now. Essentially, like, you tap certain parts of your body in a process as you are saying something. I feel anxious because this, or I'm angry at this, and I deeply and completely love and accept myself as you go through that. And so it seems silly when you go through the process. So oftentimes you do it kind of in the privacy of your own room. You're walking down the street going like this. I think it'll become a little bit more mainstream with time, but essentially it's kind of, it's the idea of your body being a storehouse of these messages essentially that you tell yourself, and it's kind of releasing it through that. And it seems to work for me. But the one thing I wanted to mention, Goffey, is the idea, the reason why I like talking about non-duality versus talking about oneness is the idea that non-duality in its structure, in the word itself, has two parts, essentially non-dual, not two. And so there's a recognition of the separation in the word itself, or the phrase itself. And so by recognizing that it's a constant reminder of the illusion. And because how your mind works is it never gets tired. Well, maybe it does, but it seems to never get tired in a lot of ways for many of us, because it continues to have, the idea of separate self, is in every moment, and it's always holding itself up. And so, a lot of times the goal in non-duality or awakening is to, how do you lay the burden down? How do you set that down? Because I'm tired of propping up this illusion. And I think sometimes that's where the recognition comes in. But I think when we use the term oneness, it doesn't recognize the fact of kind of the release or the negation of your illusory thought processes. It can reinforce them. And so oneness can, for some people, I guess, oneness can reinforce that, in the sense that the separate self, or me, I want to become oneness. And so oneness is me outward and so it's kind of a self-centered way of viewing what the concept of oneness is. Whereas going the other direction with non-duality, it's recognizing that what you want to be as oneness is false in a sense as well. And so it's kind of going at it in a different direction. But I think the trap for the idea of becoming oneness, or seeing the world as oneness, is you basically project your BS onto the world around you. And that's where I think that can be an easier trap. But, the same thing with non-duality, though. It can be the same trap of following some guru or thinking you have to act a certain way. Ishta says, your comment about babies being inherently connected reminds me of the verse, unless you be as a little child, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven is within. Yes, that is true. And I think, there's interpretation for me on those things. But I guess how I look at that, in a sense, is kind of what we were talking about before, is the reason why I think a lot of non-dual speakers tend to be older is because as you're developing as a human being, a lot of it is collecting. Especially when you get older and you have kids, you have all these, collect all these things and toys and stuff. But as you're developing throughout the different stages of life, you are adding into your idea of who you are and that sort of thing. And non-duality is very negating that. It's kind of releasing from some of that stuff in a sense. But the beauty about non-duality is you don't have to do anything. There's no requirement to release. There's no requirement to let go or to destroy or to tear down. And that's where, depending on what level of development you are as a culture, as an individual, let's see. try not to get off on a huge tangent, but basically, when you are at a certain level, a lot of times you want to, everything else outside of your frame of reference, your consciousness, your worldview is seen as a negative or bad. And so you want to tear that down. And so if you look at like postmodernism, it's tearing down the culture. It's subverting. It's looking at what the status quo is and trying to demolish it. And there's something to some of those processes, because as you develop, you have to let go of what happened before, what came before, in order to develop into something new. But as Ken Wilber says, you have to transcend and include. And so, part of that is a tearing down and a growing process is intertwined, kind of two sides of the same coin. But if you want to burn the whole city to the ground or become this non-person, then you're missing the whole point. You don't have to destroy yourself to get anything. Like non-duality has nothing to do with some of this idea of becoming not this and not that, because the recognition is the shadow, or the other is you as well. And so there's nothing to destroy, essentially, because what are you going to destroy? So I think the idea of entering the kingdom of heaven as a little child is kind of like in the Matrix as well, when Morpheus tells Neo that we usually don't try to free the mind of adults because they've been so indoctrinated with the culture and the world, and their identification as the self is they can't deal with it, they can't handle it. And so if you want to explore the kingdom of heaven, you have to kind of release from that. And I think, the idea of death is kind of the ultimate release, but the obsession with death, because non-duality is all about life, and it's not life in the sense as the opposite of death. It's life in the sense of what is. It's this moment. It's this energy, if you will. It's this is non-duality. And so life essentially never ends. It's eternal. And that's the beauty of it. And that's kind of, I want to find eternity where you have to, believe in Jesus Christ. You have to follow the ways of God. And it's like, well, I don't want to do that because you can't tell me what to do. And I don't believe in Jesus Christ. That's just made up, blah, 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 blah. And you're kind of missing the forest for the trees. You're looking at the story and reacting with your own story. It's the separate self trying to define reality versus actually letting go and letting God. That's what the mind tries to do. And what's the end goal of the ego, the separate self? What's the ultimate accomplishment? If you look at disease or illness, when it comes to identification with the separate self, in a positive way, seeing yourself as separate, differentiated, you can build a life, you can do certain things you can want. And it's kind of naturally ingrained in us. But when it becomes ill health, when it becomes out of step with what is, no, I shouldn't say it like that. When the separate self becomes obsessed with itself, the ultimate goal is destruction, is death. And so the separate self, what does it want? What is its ultimate goal? What is the essence of the separate self that believes it to be God, or wants to be God, or sees God as separate than themselves? What does it want to do? It wants to kill itself. It wants to kill others, essentially. That's a little bit, kind of, I don't know, negative, or that's kind of the basis of it, I guess. And So death is the religion of the separate self. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense, because I don't want to get super, downer here. But if you look at what does it want to do, because it wants to become king, it wants to become, it wants to basically take over and become God. Satan is the ultimate image of that, the deceiver, the one that wants to defy God, to become God. And what does that mean? It means that you want to basically live an illusion. And so when you realize, or when that illusion is shown to be false, the reaction to that is to destroy itself, the illusion or the ego, which could be its own person, or to destroy the creation, because the creation, or the objective world, and the separate self is one. And so, a sociopath or psychopath wants to destroy others, where, someone that is depressed or sees himself as the bad person, wants to destroy themselves, or both, essentially. And so that's kind of the root of the separate self, which is kind of a bummer. Okay. Ishta says, eternity is now in progress and always has been. Yes, that's true. Mert Goffey, oneness can be misleading, I guess, sounding like that is the real goal state or something. Okay. Oneness can be misleading, I guess, sounding like that is the real goal state or something. Yes. Never heard of EFT. Interesting. Is trying to control essentially a product of not feeling safe. I guess in regards to that question, I think there's, divine geometry, or, seeing the world. I think there's different, essentially, essences or personalities or ways that we interact with the world. And so, sometimes people define what the base of that, or the root of that is fear, but if you look at the 7 deadly sins, or I've talked about the Enneagram, which is a 9 types of a personality system. Depending on kind of how you relate to the world, how you're hardwired, essentially. Is it not feeling safe? If that's what you're saying you think it is, then maybe that's something you should reflect on to see, why would you say that? Why is it, someone else could say is trying to control essentially a product of not feeling loved, or a product of feeling separate, but you said not feeling safe. So I would kind of look into that. Murkoff says, ego's ultimate and end goal seems to be security, eternal life, never running out, or sensory pleasure, and never experience pain. Ego's ultimate end goal seems to be security, eternal life, never running out of sensory pleasure, and never experience pain. I think to some extent, I think part of that statement depends on how you define ego. And that's why I like to use the phrase separate self, because, taking some psychology classes or reading books and stuff, I think, and just my inner reflection, because you have, in Freud, you got ego, superego, id. I think with ego, if you define it in that way, I think even animals that maybe don't have a human type of an ego avoid pain. So it's something that's in the natural world. But yes, I think there is a lot of truth to that. And I think the whole idea, the mythology of vampires is very telling. So I would consider that. Hey, B. Brandon, do you have any pointers by chance? Trying to trying to see this, even though I know everyone says there's no I to see this. It's already is. I don't know. You know about the Enneagram. Nice. I'm a 4. Any particular? Oh, hold on the Enneagram here. Do you have any pointers by chance trying to see this, even though I know everyone says there's no I to see this? It already is. I don't know. I don't know if you were here earlier in the conversation, but realizing when I made the 30-second video to say, hey, come to these live talks, I'll be doing a series of them. When I made that video here a couple days ago, it wasn't a very enjoyable process because I wanted to be succinct with what I was saying. So I had quite a few takes, and as I was doing it, there was this sense of feeling phony or false. And because I'm putting on a production, and at the time, a lot of times when I make those videos, I want to do them, and then I go to make them, and I'm just like, I don't really want to do this right now. And so the reason I say that is because when it comes to listening to people and what they say, recognize that you're seeing the messenger. Recognize that, look at how you're perceiving what I'm saying. And so I'm not necessarily the greatest communicator. And when you talk about this subject, it can be hard to kind of express because there's nothing really to say. You can point to saying that. You can point to what it isn't, because that's ever apparent, but you can't really define exactly what it is, because even non-duality is essentially kind of the process of forgiveness, if you want to call it that, or negation. But when you talk about there's nothing to see, if you look at A Course in Miracles, if you're not familiar with that, check that out. But it's the idea of a lot of times non-dual speakers go in the process of negation, where you say, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not this chair, I'm not the carpet, I'm not the computer, I'm not my emotions. And so as you go through that process, what's the end of that? What's the end of the rabbit hole? You can take it the other way and say, in the additional process, and say, I am that chair, I am that leg, I am that hand, I am that carpet, I am that emotion, I am frustration, I am that thought. And if you do that infinitely, it's kind of the same. You come to the same conclusion. You find the end of the rabbit hole, essentially. And it's not necessarily something that you can arrive at. Like, there is the process itself can give you some perspective, but to be able to understand and see that there is nothing to see, it's kind of this recognition that it's what's the phrase? It's a fool's errand. You'll never find it. And so what ends up happening is, if you watch videos and you say, well, this guy says this, or this lady says this, and I don't agree with that, I think this and that. It's not so much the speaker being so eloquent. I think a lot of time there's certain ways that they try to communicate, or certain techniques or tactics that they use to get you to question your beliefs. And I think that can be helpful. But I would say, how do you react to what I'm saying? How do you react to what you see? What are those thoughts or feelings that come up? Because that can be the most instructive. Because if you think things like, this guy's a moron, or here, I'll give you an example. Hold that thought. All right. So I like comments on my YouTube videos. So if you want to leave some comments, that's great. But I guess and I shouldn't necessarily tell you this because I don't want to attract more negativity, but yeah, I guess historically I've been more self-critical. So when people are trying to be mean, it doesn't really affect me. I actually kind of think it's funny. So I had a couple of my videos, my best method to experience non-duality. I'm looking at my phone. Hey, look, there's the Enneagram. So that's my most popular video because it's the best method, I guess. But there's one person wrote, because I mentioned something in the video about, I struggled trying to find a girlfriend back in college, and people would tell me, you'll find one when you're not looking. It's like, what the heck does that mean? And that's kind of how non-duality works. And it was frustrating. But someone wrote, for a girlfriend, a wife? I'm sorry, dude. I mean, you're not straight for real, right? And then another person on one of my videos said, simp, you are in trap. Anyone can blither on YouTube. So he called me a simp. Well, we won't get into that, but so the point is, people see this reflection of yourself. Essentially, I'm a reflection of you, and vice versa. This is not something that it's me bringing, kind of like how Moses brought the 10 commandments, like, here's the 10 commandments, this is what you must follow. Like when it comes to non-duality, it's just like, it's not something that like, here's non-duality, here I'm going to show you, I can show you the door, I can point to it, but ultimately you have to walk through. And so watch your reaction to the speaker. Obviously those people that read their comments weren't too fond of what I'm doing, but that's maybe something you can look at. Okay, I do know about the Enneagram. B. Brandon, nice. I'm a 4. Any particular advice? Pointer for 4. Well, when I first learned about the Enneagram in college from one of my professors named Sheila, she went over it in class. And it wasn't part of the curriculum, which, got to give her props for that. I identified as a 4. And going through a process, realized that I'm actually a 5 with a 4 wing. So I do identify as with a lot of 4, but I saw a 5 as kind of the nerdy scientist, which, I'd like some of that stuff, but at the same time, I didn't identify with that. And so the difficulty with being on the bottom here, so I don't know which direction, so 5 or 4, one of the two, there's that obvious separation there. It can be the most kind of isolating, and I think percentage of population typically is less, so I don't know what kind of wing you lean towards, but as far as the 4 is said, because I've done a lot of thinking about the Enneagram. It's somewhat of a mental tinker toy, as 5s sometimes do. But when it comes to 4s, oh man, I think the emotional freedom techniques, the tapping, would be something I would, as far as a recommendation. Like I said, I'm not a licensed anything, so you can take it for what it is. I mean, that's something I do. So I guess maybe I shouldn't recommend. I don't know how that works, but do whatever you want to do. But that's something I do, and I think for 4, doing something to be able to objectively view your emotional states without creating the story behind it. Because I think what happens is, if you look at the 3 different centers, you got the instinctual center, and then the emotional and the thinking centers. There's 3 centers. What ends up happening is the 2 of the centers kind of merge versus being differentiated in a healthy way. They merge. And so a lot of times the story of I'm sad, or this person hurt me, or, I'm lonely, or I wish I could find someone to love me, that kind of story ends up getting interwoven. And so I think things like the emotional freedom techniques since it's such you say a simple thing, then you can process it without creating another story behind it, essentially. But I think the 4s that I know in my life, it's kind of this idea of, from what I recognize, there's a definite push-pull to that relationship, but it's a lot more let's see, I don't know how to word this. But essentially, like, I want this relationship, I want this, I'm lacking, I'm flawed, I'm, you know, the tragic, you know, romantic, essentially. But then when you have that thing, you don't want it because it's not up to your expectations. And so I think that's probably the things you're struggling with, and recognizing that the story is the grass is always green can maybe be something that would be helpful. Mert Goff says, okay, thanks. That's just me. I guess the more correct word would be lack or fear, not security. Yeah, I guess I should look into not feeling secure then. I did read a book, and it was an older book a long time ago, and I think Sheila suggested it, but it was something to do with the idea of feeling, uncertainty and kind of coping with uncertainty. And I can't remember the name of the book, so I guess it's not very helpful, but I think we are in an uncertain world, especially as we're going through our own collective process now. I think the thing about non-duality is the truth is here in the moment, and sometimes it takes time to be able to process that, even though the potential energy, the truth is already there in the moment. We maybe don't recognize it because we miss the signs until later on. And I think as a society, as a culture right now, we're going through a process of change that's, especially started over this past year or so, that we haven't processed it. So I think the next handful of months are going to be very interesting. And so if you see it kind of objectively from culture, society processing, developing in the same way that you do on an internal basis, you can kind of see it as a process and kind of see it from 50,000 feet versus being in the story, in the change, in the emotion of the moment, because it's going to be emotional. So should you look into not feeling secure? From a non-dual perspective, it doesn't matter. So maybe that's helpful. But, you want to take non-duality and make something out of it, then you try to be more secure. And the more you try to feel more secure, the more you're reinforcing the idea that you're not secure. Ishta says, we don't need to negate the ego, just recognize that, like anything else in creation, it simply is. It is neither good nor bad. Yes. It can be unhealthy and healthy, but that obviously is a judgment. But from a developmental standpoint, you can make those differentiations, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Murkoff says, non-duality is a neat word, just says what it isn't, but we can interpret it wrongly as it is oneness. Well, it is oneness, but it's not. So that's the frustrating thing. And that's why a lot of speakers talk in dialectic, in opposites. And that's why I think it is helpful for non-duality, is to look at the shadow, look at the opposite, and look at the other, and see what kind of things you can learn from that. Because what is the opposite of I am scared? I am courageous, that sort of thing. And I think there's a lot to that. Merk Goff says, I like trying to read books describing what an empty page looks like. Hey, it's just like this without all the words. Yeah, that's not a so-called great book. Laugh out loud. Exactly. Like I have some ideas for at least one in particular, a book I want to write, The problem I have is I have the structure and the idea and the process of the book, but I don't know exactly what the story is going to be. And then it becomes a manual versus a story. So then, I think if I can think of something that is compelling from a story, and there's development and there's character, because that's what people relate to, and that's why people get engaged. So if you watch movies or read books, a lot of times when they start off like that close. Like it's like you can start a movie with like, you don't know where the setting is, you don't know the circumstance, but like if the character is compelling and there's something happening that you're like engaged in, a lot of times movies take that kind of approach, because then you pull back, you say, okay, well, this is the environment, this is the story, there's some other characters, this is what's going on in the world. Because if you start from the big picture, then it's like, well, here's some characters, and this is what's going, and this is society, and this is what's politically going on. And it's like, no, it's just too big. No one cares, because people they're looking for the connection on that kind of individual level. And so if I were to write a book, if I just write it with like a purpose or a structure, then who's going to want to read that? Let's see. Even writing like some sort of like self-help book or a book about non-duality, it's more nonfiction, it would be dry unless I had some like personal stories. So, and that's where I kind of struggle even on this. I don't really talk much about myself. B. Brandon says, thank you. Really appreciate that. Thank you for your time. I heard of tapping, but haven't checked it out. Will do. Thank you for your point of view. Blessings to you as well. Merk Goff says, now I want to go research Enneagrams and stuff too. All this mental candy is so tempting. Like, any tips on EFT resources, but I guess a story will never be satisfied, so directly go to the me story. Murkoff says, protagonist, hero's journey, and all that. Yes, exactly. So many stories are built on the hero story, all the way back to, what do you call it? I'm blanking out. Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, those types of hero stories. A lot of the ones, even today's books and movies, are kind of the same basic kind of premise, if you will. And before you go, B. Brandon, I'm going to, who asked about the EFT? Yeah, tapping. I'm going to get I printed it out a long time ago, and maybe they'll have, I don't know if the website's still there, but it was something like a PDF that you could print out, and it goes through kind of the whole process. I've got that in my closet. I'll go run and grab that real quick. So yes, mental candy, Murkoff. It's kind of like, I don't know if you know the band Live, but they've got the album called Mental Jewelry. It's kind of the same deal, and I like their music. So maybe Ed Kowalczyk is into non-duality. Maybe he's into a lot of different stuff like that. So I would kind of assume. So if you're watching this, Eddie, I just want to give a shout out. I love your music. But I'll be back. I'm going to grab the EFT booklet, and then we'll do maybe 5 more minutes. So stay tuned here. Okay, I guess I lied. I must have put it in storage. If I can find it online, I'll put a link in the description below so you can find it there. So if I can find it at another time, I'll do that. But I enjoy these conversations. Like I said, I don't know exactly why I do them, what the point of them is, but hopefully if it's helpful. Like I said, I had some dreams here a few nights where I don't know. I think, if people, if you're going through similar type of things, it can be helpful to hear other perspectives. And so that's kind of part of the reason. I'm sure I get something out of this as well. So it's kind of a mutual benefit. Making videos, I think I like doing these live ones much better than making videos, but I think YouTube, to getting them out more, getting your message out more, I think maybe prioritizes actual videos versus these super long form live talks. But does anyone have any further questions before we go? Anything off the topic? Anything just random? Whatever. Just And I just want to say thank you for all your participation today. It makes it so much more fun. And, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe so you can participate. Merck Goff says, thanks. It is helpful. So easy to get caught in the echo chamber of your thoughts. Yes, and I think from a 5 on the Enneagram side, and I would say my Myers-Briggs is INTP, right? Yes, it's the one. If you separate the INTJ versus INTP, one is kind of the Einstein personality, and the other is Tesla, essentially. And it sounds a little bit what's the right word, narcissistic to say, I've got the Einstein personality, but that's kind of how I view the world. Probably not as smart as he was, but it's fine. But yeah, so the point of the echo chamber is, how do you know if your thoughts are correct or if they're just a bunch of BS? Not in the non-dual sense, but in just the general, like, I see the world a certain way. Is it accurate or more like, what's the level of objectivity of your thoughts, is to not just continue. The downward spiral is to be stuck in your head and to believe things about the world, but to go out and to test and to talk to people and to see if your perceptions, if your judgments, if your thought processes are correct. That's how you learn and grow. And so that's maybe why I do some of this stuff. My thinking is INFJ, I think, which is another, I think that's one of the most rare, Myers-Briggs types. I'm not sure on the, my thinking and feeling kind of are similar in certain ways. I think it's the 5 with the 4 type of a wing thing, but I know that's a pretty rare. So you probably feel like kind of like an alien in society, which is fine. Murkoff says, thinking yourself into a hole has been an issue. Yeah, see, that's a good, I'm glad you brought that up, because, I think that is a lot of the reason why people come to the non-duality subject in the first place, is because there is something that seems to be out of place. There's a splinter in your mind. There's something wrong. There's something that you want to get rid of or avoid, or something you're trying to achieve. And so that's where, even though non-duality itself isn't helpful, but it is truly helpful to know that you are forgiven. Like, you don't have to do anything. So if you fall into that mind hole, which I've done before, where does it end? You become a statue. And what changes with that? Nothing. So do you want to be a statue? Or do you want to have childlike wonder? I think a lot of times as adults, we lose that. And, we grow up and we stop the magical thinking, believing in certain things, but the myth of magic isn't lost. And I think finding that in life, finding the wonder, finding the mystery is key, because rationality sometimes squelches that and things become empty in the sense of devoid of life, not empty in the sense of non-duality, the empty fullness. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining, and I will be doing another live talk. Oh, hold on. Oh, Ishta says, thank you to Russ and everybody else. Sidita mas ikikada hine. I butchered that, I'm sure. May your feet walk softly upon the earth. Thank you, Ishta. And I appreciate everyone joining. I'll be doing probably another one, I think next Saturday maybe, and then a few more after that. I'll probably do it maybe once a week. So just make sure you're checking. Well, you don't have to. You don't have to go on YouTube. But if you want to know when my next live chat's going to be, I'll do I'll set a upcoming event on YouTube. So until next time, peace.